So now that we've looked at the saddle height and the cleat position, now we need to get into the reach of the bike, what the difference is horizontally between the handlebars and the seat, and also vertically is how much difference is there in height between the two. So now this is a stage where it really comes in handy that we're comparing the difference between a road bike's measurements and a cross-country style mountain bike versus, say, a longer travel bike. Because in the reach, bar reach and bar height departments, the similarities will be greater between the cross-country bike and the road bike. So that's where I want to start, because that's actually a good, like I said, it's an easier comparison to make. But we won't be able to just measure from the saddle to somewhere on the stem here between the two bikes, because the hand position for these handlebars is so drastically different. On drop handlebars, we have our hands positioned out on the hoods, where of course on the mountain bike we have them on the grips. And to illustrate, it's easy to see the difference in that, because if we're measuring to the stem, on the road bike, the hand position actually extends pretty significant distance beyond the stem, where on the mountain bike, it actually is even with or even behind the stem. So that's not going to be very helpful if we're just taking from nose of the saddle to the center of the handlebar stem or something like that. What we need to do is take relative measurements. We need to measure from somewhere on the saddle, and we'll get into that in just a second, but to the likely hand position. So I like to measure to the beginning of the hood, sort of this base of the hood right here. And of course on the mountain bike, I'll measure to the center of one of the grips. Now a good question would be, am I going to account for the fact that the mountain bike handlebars are significantly wider, which does change the reach of the bike? And actually when I'm taking these measurements, I won't. I'm actually going to measure not in a horizontal distance to the hoods. I'm actually going to go straight there, because the measurements are accounting for that different width. And so we get a better comparison between the two bikes, I think, when we measure that way. So going back to now, where do we measure on the saddle? Actually, the easiest place to measure from is from the tip of the saddle up here, and just measure to our position on the handlebars. But this measurement does have a couple of downsides. If one of your saddles is maybe a non-traditional shape, like for instance like an ISM saddle, comparing this tip of the saddle measurement is not going to be fairly helpful, because again, the saddles are shaped so differently and they're much different lengths. But if you have saddles of similar shape, which I do in this case, then it can be a reasonably good comparison. Another place you could measure from is the back of the saddle, but it kind of shares the same problems with the measuring from the nose. Again, non-traditional saddle shapes, it might not translate very well to between the bikes. What I like to do most of the time is to measure from the likely sitting area, and what I mean by that is where our sit bones, which actually not our sit bones, actually our ischiorami, where they're going to be most of the time, where we expect them to contact the saddle. And for a saddle like this, I would expect that to be back in this area somewhere. So we can measure and start our tape from right there. And then we can do the same thing with the road bike saddle. So then when I go ahead and measure the mountain bike, I'll start at my sitting area, and I'm going to go kind of in the middle of the saddle here, just to equalize things. And I'm going to measure to the center of one of the grips, and I'm getting a reach of 74.5 centimeters. And now I can go ahead and do the same thing on the road bike. So I can again pick my seating area here, measure from the center of the saddle, and I'm going to measure to the base of the hood, and I'm getting a reach on this one of about 84 centimeters. The next and the last thing we're going to measure is the relative handlebar heights. And by relative, I mean the difference between the saddle height and the handlebar height. So in measuring for handlebar drop, I've seen a lot of people try a bunch of different ways to do this. One of the more tortured ways I often see is people will try and take a spirit level, and they'll try and line it up with the high point of the saddle, and then try and get it level here. And see, and this is where it gets difficult. And then try and measure somewhere to the bar or to the hand position here. But there's a lot easier way to do this. The way I like to do it actually is to measure just straight from the top of the saddle to the ground at the seat, and then at my hand position here, and then just subtract the two. Okay, so I had the end of this video all shot, and it was really long and it was kind of a mess. So I scrapped the whole thing and reshot it. I decided to make it a little bit tighter, a little bit cleaner here. So let me go back to comparing my position. So my mountain bike bar position being 7 centimeters higher than that of the road position is probably a little bit atypical, but you have to remember that this bike was set up as a single speed in its original life, and I never changed the position from that. So it helps around here, especially because a lot of the steeper hills, you really have to stand up a lot and grind through some of the gears, and so having a high bar position really helps you leverage that a little bit better. So that's why there's such a big difference on this bike. Under normal circumstances, typical cross-country mountain bike bar position might just be a couple of centimeters higher than the road bike. This is assuming that you are trying to make some either moderately technical terrain easier or make it easier going down, steep declines, that sort of thing. If you're a racer though, and you just race short track events, and many of those are really not technical at all, you can actually get away with a very, very low mountain bike handlebar position. So it might not be drastically different in some of those cases amongst the racers between their mountain bike and their road bar position. I would say my saddle position on my mountain bike relative to the road bike is pretty typical. It's just 1.5 centimeters lower than the road position. If I was riding on my 6-inch travel mountain bike, which is meant for much more aggressive terrain, my saddle height might be just a little bit lower still. But this lower saddle position for aggressive riding is getting less and less prevalent because of the fact that dropper seat posts are getting more popular. When you can quickly and easily bump the saddle height down with just the push of a button down 1 centimeter or even 10 centimeters, there's really no need to start with a lower saddle height. We talked about the cleats. Again, we start off making the cleat position very comparable between the road bike and the mountain bike. Saddle height, we just talked about that. Anywhere from 1 to 4 centimeters lower, closer to 4 centimeters on more technical terrain, except if you have a dropper seat post, in which case probably roughly the same as your road bike setup. Now, bar reach and bar height. We can generally expect that the mountain bike handlebar will be higher and also closer to the saddle. And again, we talked about a few instances where this might not be the case, but generally how much of a difference in reach to the bar between the road and the mountain bike will have to do with two main things. One, how aggressively positioned are you on your road bike, and how technical is the riding you're doing on your mountain bike. So to illustrate this, I'm going to give you two extreme scenarios here. So let's say your road position is very aggressive. You're a hardcore racer on the road, and so you might have a very aggressive saddle to handlebar reach, and also a large drop on the handlebar as well, very low handlebar position on the road bike. And then let's say you ride a full suspension 6 or 7 inch travel mountain bike, and you ride it in really aggressive, gnarly terrain. You might have a really high handlebar position that is very short to manage this technical terrain safely. In this scenario, you're going to end up with a very big difference in the reach between the two bikes and the height of the handlebars between the two bikes. It might be anywhere in the order of, you could have a reach that's anywhere from 15 to even 25 centimeters shorter on the reach of the bike. And the height difference in the handlebars might be anywhere from 8 to 15 centimeters higher on this mountain bike relative to the road bike. So very big ranges. These are the extremes. Let's talk about what are kind of more typical numbers. Now, You always have to take these with a grain of salt. I'm going to keep saying that. But for the reach, how far away from the saddle the bars are between the two bikes, you can probably expect that the mountain bike will be anywhere from 5 to 12 centimeters shorter in the reach department. And in the height department, yeah, somewhere around 3 to 7 centimeters higher on the mountain bike. Just know these are very squishy ranges, I like to call them. And there can be many reasons not to fall inside the ranges, least of which are your physical problems that you might have, whether it's something wrong with your low back or something like that. So this is kind of even separate from those things. This is just considering kind of the aggressiveness and that you approach each of the sports, road and mountain biking. So I'll finish by giving you 2 examples here, and these are just I pulled 2 more recent clients randomly out of my system here just to compare. I had one client recently. She came in, I'm just referring so I get it right here. She had a bar height difference between the road and the mountain bike, ended up only being 1 centimeter. So the mountain bike was only 1 centimeter higher. But that mountain bike reach was 20 centimeters shorter. And this seems like a really strange combination, and it kind of is until you understand the factors involved with this rider. She chronically suffers from some low back pain, and so she really benefited more from sort of a higher bar position. And then the second factor, very large factor in this, was she's very, very tiny. She's very petite, and she was able to find a true extra small mountain bike that fit her very well. But her road bike did not fit her quite as well. It was a pretty solid small, which was maybe actually a little bit too big for her, and so it presented some challenges in the fitting process. And so again, those are even more factors that might determine where the bars end up on each of the bikes. You might be limited by the actual bike that you have. And then another recent client, this is a little bit more typical, but still illustrates some of the differences we'll see. So in bar height difference, and this gentleman was taller, he's about 5'11", 6 feet tall, about a 6 centimeter difference in bar height between the two bikes. And it was a full suspension mountain bike. And the reach on the mountain bike was 17 centimeters shorter. That's a fairly large difference. It's a little bit larger than average, it may be, but it had to do with the fact that, again, he actually did race on the road, and his mountain biking was not sort of easy cross-country mountain biking. He rode a full suspension bike on some of the more technical terrain that we have around here. So I know that's a lot of information. It's kind of all over the board, but unfortunately that's just the way it is with trying to compare these things, especially the bar position. That is the one very difficult thing to just nail down and give you narrow ranges for. It's just often not possible, but that's the best I can do. I hope that helps. If you have any questions, put them in the comments below. And I think that's it for now. Thanks for hanging in there, and we'll catch you on the next video.